Ladies and gentlemen, 1 week to go before 9.1, Blizzard gave us the legendary bow and a bunch of the new affixed modded weapons to try out on the PTR. So let's take a look at these cool babies. Before we go too deep into this, there are definitely some numbers issues and Blizzard needs to tweak these weapons. That's exactly why they've put them on the PTR. So be aware that I'm aware of these things, not to panic. They'll definitely be adjusting these things over the coming week. All right, so let's take a look first of all with the big one, the legendary bow. Ray Shalar, Death's Whisper is the legendary bow that drops off Sylvanas. Some interesting things here with the drop rate is it does drop in normal, heroic, and mythic, but it will have different item levels. There's going to be a way to upgrade it, so if you pick it up in normal, you're lucky enough to pick it up there. Don't panic that, oh, I'm not going to get it in mythic, I'm not going to get it in heroic. You are going to be able to upgrade the weapon as you move through it. There is no version of this weapon in the LFR though. It is normal, heroic, and mythic only, and of course it drops off Sylvanas. Now the interesting thing about this weapon is it gives you a brand new ability. That is going to be Wailing Arrow. Wailing Arrow has a unique effect. It's an AoE silence. There's a 1 minute cooldown and it does AoE splash damage. So I have some initial testing with this thing. It has a cast time, so it feels very much like an aim shot, but it's not a huge amount of damage. It's like if you use it on cooldown, I think the math right now is like a 1% increase in DPS. It's not there for its damage effect. It's actually really there for its utility. And it's a 1 minute AoE silence that lasts like 5 seconds. It is a really good effect. So super strong in Mythic Plus. Not going to see much use in the raid, no doubt, but it is there as an option. And it does technically increase your DPS. This is really much more of a utility feature is what they're adding with Wailing Arrow. So it's still super cool to have a brand new ability added to your class. It is, of course, going to be marksman and BM. Survival can, like, kind of use it and then re-equip weapons. You're not going to use it if you're survival, let's face facts. But what it is pretty awesome. At first, I thought it was going to be a huge damaging ability. It's not that. It's also a very small radius. So what you're not going to be able to do is fire into a wide spread out pack of enemies and silence them all and bring them in like you could do with, say, the old Blood Elf ability, the Arcane Torrent, where you could run in and do a huge silencing AoE. It's if the mobs are clustered, you can shut them all down for a period of time. So it's like adding like a Shadow Fury to Hunters, although it doesn't have the stun effect. It's very, very cool, though. I like this. It's not about the DPS, this ability, which is what I think we initially expected. It's really more about the utility it brings. And having a 1 minute cooldown that AoE silences everything for a good period of time is a very strong ability. It's just not going to be a big damage ability like I think a lot of people are waiting for. So this is one of those ones I'm glad we got to take a look at. For our two-handed strength users out there, we've got a very interesting weapon called Jaethys the Prison Blade. Jaethys is interesting because it can consume other weapons to upgrade itself. Now, currently, that upgrade's not looking worthwhile for a lot of classes, but again, I'm sure Blizzard will tweak that. It's essentially a case of adding proc, so it gains a strength proc, and it gains an ability to proc on damage effects when it's used. So the more you consume weapons, you can upgrade it 5 times. The upgrade system is kind of interesting. It needs to be, from what we can tell, of the same item level at least as Jaethys. So if you get the normal version, which is 226, you can consume Nathria mythic weapons into Jaethys to start the upgrade process. Other than that, you are going to need new items from the new season in order to consume it and level it up. So once you level this thing up, it gains a 1,000 strength damage buff. It gains a massive on damage proc. The proc rate seemed very low. Fury Warriors can dual wield this. That is absolutely a thing. As of right now, you can dual wield it and effectively double the effect. And what it does is it actually straight up doubles the proc. One thing I would comment on this weapon is the actual strength proc is really short. It's like 3 seconds. It can proc back to back, so you get a longer duration. But for those of you out there who like to be able to manage your procs, so if you get a huge strength bonus, you would like to pop your recklessness, that's when you want to use your cooldowns, things like that. It doesn't really last quite long enough to make use of it, which I found a little disappointing. If I'm going to gain something that gives me a large damage proc, I want to be able to utilize it in some way. So if my strength suddenly gets increased, that's when I would like to use cooldowns and all those kind of things with it. Jaethys right now does not allow that, which is a bit of a bummer. A cool thing, though, is it has dialogue. So when you do feed it weapons, it does, in fact, talk to you. It has quite an array of dialogue. Far more dialogue lines than you can actually utilize by singularly upgrading one of these weapons, which is a little odd. I thought they would have pre-planned it so it had like 5 dialogue lines to go along with it. But that's not the case. It has something like 12 or 13, at least that I've heard so far. And sometimes they repeat, which is a little unusual because it has so many choices, it must randomly pick them. And sometimes you just get the same one back to back, even though it definitely has a lot more choices to go with it. It cannot consume itself. So I know you're thinking there is like, okay, so when everybody gets their Jaythis, the further drops that we get, can we just feed them to Jaythis? No. In fact, in the words of Blizzard, Jaythis is many things. It is not a cannibal. So it will not eat itself. It will have to be consuming other weapons that are not itself in order to do that. On top of that, it will give you a message if you try and use the consume effect on other lesser items. It will say they're too puny. One sacrifice, and why you might be wondering, hey, why are people saying don't upgrade this? So I'm 99% sure Blizzard's going to fix this, so you do want to upgrade this. Otherwise, a lot of uneducated people are going to be using the consume effect and eating other weapons and getting like a lesser weapon out of it. The reason people are saying that is because every time you upgrade Jaythis, every time you feed it a weapon, it loses some of its secondary stats in order to give you the proc effect. So that continues until you have like the fully fledged weapon, which has absolutely no secondary stats on it at all. It just has the strength buff and the proc, the damage proc. Which means that some people who are very, very much needing secondary stats would prefer just to have secondary stats than the proc effect, especially when the strength proc can't be utilized properly. So that, keep an eye on that. I'm sure Blizzard's going to change that. Otherwise, your average player is going to be picking up Jaythis and feeding it weapons and wondering why their damage is going down, which is not what the intention is with this. So I'm sure they're going to fix it. Next up, we've got Jolteon Gear. Jolteon Gear, Destiny's Call. It's a two-handed agi staff, so your survival hunters, your monks, and your feral druids, this is for you. This is kind of cool. So what it does is it has a 3-minute cooldown associated with it. This thing starts off with no secondary stats at all, but it does have this 3-minute cooldown, which will boost your secondary stats by 220 at Mythic. Gives you a massive secondary stat buff when you use it, and not only that, it actually has an animation with it. So our other two weapons do not have an animation with them. Neither do the other two we're going to be looking at today. This one does. It will turn you into one of the Forsworn Valkyr types, and that will be your new form. So if you're a cat, you will turn into a big Forsworn Valkyr type character who's going to start whacking away with his melee weapon and all that kind of stuff. Very cool. It's nice to see those kinds of transformations coming back a little bit. We haven't really seen them for a while, or certainly with loot that's enabled these kinds of transformations. That's all it does. It's just an on-use secondary stat. A couple of interesting things here. It does put your trinkets on cooldown, which was kind of... we want to stack these things up, right? That's the nature of the beast. If you've been watching the Basics series, you will understand that stacking cooldowns is effective, and this kind of pushes you towards passive trinkets so that you're not just wasting unused trinkets along with using like this weapon. There's some interesting things that could happen here depending on how you want to play and the drawbacks with energy and things like that. But as it is a 3-minute cooldown and it gives you this buff for 30 seconds, you may find some degeneracy here in swapping this weapon out when it's on cooldown with something that does have secondary stats. If you do swap it out immediately, you do lose the buff. So you could use the buff, then swap it out to something else, use secondary stats for a little while, and then put the weapon back on with like 30 seconds before the proc is available again, and then utilize the proc again and swap that back out. Blizzard obviously does not want you to start doing degenerate things like that. They don't enjoy things like that. It's not the purpose of it. So a little rejigging here might be necessary unless Blizzard thinks like the energy issues it would cause with swapping weapons isn't a big deal, or it's not something that people find is actually going to pay off. All right. So just something to keep an eye on there is when we were playing with it is that you could do that. Not something I'd recommend, or I don't think Blizzard wants either. But it's a cool staff. You get to turn into a Valkyr. It's a nice little effect that goes along with it. And the cooldown is very, very effective, especially you can line it up with your other cooldowns, seemingly just not unused trinkets. Next up, we have the cruciform Vayne Ripper. This is your one-handed fist weapon. It is an agi fist weapon, and you can dual wield this, which gives it an enormous, enormous increase in potential damage. What is its effect? Well, it works in a number of ways. If you are behind your target, so PvE DPS, if their movement is slowed, the target has some sort of movement impairing effect on them, or they have some CC on them, then you gain the ability to proc gushing wounds. Essentially, this is just gushing wounds is back. The corruption is is back. So it works naturally. It has a ridiculously high proc rate. It's crazy. It's up all the time and gives you an enormous damage boost, especially if you're dual wielding these things. I messed around with it on my monk quite a little bit, and the bleed damage was pretty excessive. Really quite cool. There are some ways of proccing this on multiple targets, like Zuwen can do that. If you get into other classes that can sort of cleave on targets, you can proc them on the both in order to get more effectiveness out of this. So there's nothing tricky here. There's nothing like the Druid staff or the Jathis weapon or gaining the new ability from the Legendary Bow. It is just gushing wounds that will naturally proc if you are behind the target or the target is slowed or has some sort of CC effect on them. You'll naturally gain the ability to proc this effect. So it's something you want to be aware of, and a nice way of Blizzard reminding players that you should be stood behind the boss. You really do want to stand behind that boss if you want to get the best out of your weapons. A final weapon we're going to look at that has some sort of crazy damaging affix. There's another thing I'd like to point out is the Edge of Night. This is the dagger. You can dual wield these as well, similar to the Vayne Rippers. These are obviously for rogues. And this is going to give you a new proc that attaches itself to the target called Banshee's Blight. Now, Banshee's Blight is a stacking dot, and it stacks almost immediately. So once it's on the target, it lasts forever, which seems to be how it's going to work. Once you put it on a target, it is there and gives your finishing moves a massive damage bonus. A massive damage bonus, I should point out here. It is absolutely huge. So your finishing moves have a 3% chance per combo point to deal this bonus shadow damage, and this adds up really quickly, because especially if you're playing something like a SAS or something like that, you're doing lots of finishes and sub things like that. Now, this thing actually stacks up more the lower health the target has, so it can have a maximum stacks at 4 when the target is weakest, giving you an execute thing. Right now, the numbers do point to it being sort of like an execute style weapon, and that's where it's going to be more effective, but overall, it's very passive. So there's no trickery here like we saw with the Vayne Ripper where you had to be behind the target. This is just a case of if you attack the target, it gains Banshee's Blight, and your finishing moves will have this chance to do this bonus damage alongside with it. I will point out, though, that it looks like it has no secondary stats, and that's the thing you've got to bear in mind here. It has no secondary stats, and that is something that people are a little concerned about with these procs, because, yeah, the proc damage is very good. It came out to about 10% for us. It was a very high source of damage, especially when dual wielding, but you are giving up quite a lot of secondary stats on your weapons in order to make that happen, and there are other weapons of the same item level that do have secondary stats. So, again, Blizzard does want you to use these weapons. They do come from Kel'Thuzad and Sylvanas. All these weapons that we're looking at today do. So, it's a case of let the math guys work it out. But I'm sure Blizzard wants you to use this, and it should be the best. Fingers crossed in order to make that work. The only other weapon I wanted to point out today is not one I can show you. They did not make this available for testing. Neither did they make the quiver available to put on. It's actually the Devouring Cold from Kel'Thuzad. This is a one-handed strength weapon that does have an affix, so I wanted to put it in this video, which is adjust your weapon. From everything we know, this is just going to move its place in the transmog. So it either goes at your side while you're not in combat, or it goes over your back while not in combat. So some of you are probably saying, well, where's the caster weapon, Mike? There is nothing for casters. There is nothing for healers. And nothing really for most of the tanks. I don't know why. It has nothing to do with me. I didn't do that. But the casters did not get anything here that has some sort of interesting, weird little affix, little thing of extra spice to go with it. I don't know why that decision has been made, but it has been made. That is the nature of it. So that is the interesting new weapons and some new procs. Like I say, it's a mixed bag. We've got stuff like the Legendary Bow, which I think everybody expected to just do a ton of damage, which it doesn't, but it adds this very powerful utility in certain environments. Certainly in PvP, certainly if you're doing rated BGs, and also Mythic Plus, like Wailing Arrow is going to be really strong. Some of them are entirely passive, like the Gushing Wounds one. As long as you're behind the target, you're going to get this Gushing Wounds effect, and the same thing with the Rogue Daggers. The Valkyr one has an animation, so there's a real mix here. The others don't really have an animation. That one has a very specific animation. Some of them are utility, some of them are just entirely passive damage bonuses, but it's nice to see anyway that Blizzard is creating stuff like this and saying like, well, maybe we can do some interesting and different stuff. Hopefully over the next week, they are going to tweak the numbers on this. As I said at the start, and I mentioned a couple of times through the video, there are definitely some interesting things happening with numbers here, as they don't have, like, you know, they don't have secondary stats and things, and people are like, hang on a minute, wait a minute, wait. It has a proc, but how good is that compared to always having these stats and things like that? But hopefully that'll get worked out over the next few days, as 9.1 is launching very soon. So there you go, guys. That's a look at the new weapons. Take it easy. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.